My grandfather had a speech impediment. I share this with the church once in a while. He had a speech impediment, and it'd be time to start church, and he says, "It is the appointed time." It is the appointed time this afternoon, and we'd like to call this order of the Wausau Town Council, this session of the Town Council to order. If you would please stand with us for the invocation and remain standing for the pledge of allegiance. Our invocation this evening is given by Wayne Hagan, who's the pastor of Christian Haven Church over here on the Finch Circle. And if you would, Ronnie.
Father, we thank you for today, and we thank you, God, for those who take time out to help our town and our county. Ask you, God, to bless them with wisdom, and God, let everything be done today decent, in order, and pleasing to you. For it's in Jesus' name I ask. Amen.
Amen. Salute and pledge. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In just a couple of minutes, we're going to make a change in the meeting tonight, but Carol is going to, Mayor Pro Tem West is going to share the meeting tonight simply for the experience. There may be a time when we aren't here. Most likely will be a time that we might not be here during a meeting, and I would hate for her to have to maybe even have a heavier agenda or something like that. So she's going to do that. We spoke just a minute ago, not in such violation of the sunshine, but I'll make a declaration that we spoke just a minute ago, and I'm going to chair until we get to Mr. Hilton Galloway, and or until we're finished with Mr. Galloway, our auditor tonight. This will be her first opportunity to do that. We're going to do that one, and then we're going to change. You have your minutes and your consent agenda, your book, and everything like that. Is there anything on the consent agenda that you would like to have removed for further discussion? Or is there anything that that's not on the consent agenda that we should have had? Hearing none, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll make a motion.
We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? How do you vote, Ms. West?
Yes.
Mr. Walksnail?
Yes.
Mr. Park?
Yes.
Mr. Carter?
Yes.
The chair votes yes. Okay. Mr. Galloway, welcome back to Wausau.
Glad to be back. Anytime.
We're glad to see you this afternoon, because all is well with you, and we hope more that all is well with us.
We will dive in and see. I appreciate the opportunity to come down and make the presentation. I got one apology to make. I spent about an hour and a half yesterday going through your report, pulling out all my comments. Got here today and my report that I had all my notes on was gone. So y'all gonna get the Cliff Note version, but I think we'll hit all the high
If
points.
anybody's got hills, let him have it back.
Yeah, if you come across it, and I've been through a while, so I know it's not there. I had a funeral this morning. I went there. My wife took all my audit reports and threw them in the back seat. My mother-in-law crawled in, and I was accusing them of throwing them out. Thought, anyway, y'all don't hear my family. Wausau has an audit report somewhere between here and Pride, Alabama. I'm sure it's there. Not where it's supposed to be. If everybody's got a report, what I'll do is just basically go through and point out the significant items of the report. Basically what you have is our opinion in the front and the back, and in the middle section are the financial statements. I think are primarily interesting. That's what we're going to spend most of my time focusing on. But if you'll turn past the report tab to page 2, you'll see our opinion on the financial statement. If there are modifications to the report, or if the report are not prepared in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, this is where we would disclose that and see under the opinion first line. In our opinion, the financial statement is referred to above present fairly, meaning there are no exceptions in the report in terms of the numbers and the note disclosures that are presented in regards to accounting principles. So again, there's no misrepresentations in the report as a result of our audit. Any adjustments that we find during the course of our audit, Margaret always makes, and we disclose it in the financial statement. So we correct any deficiencies we see, as long as us and Margaret can agree that one or the other of us is right in terms of making an adjustment. On page 4 is your management discussion and analysis. This is a narrative explanation of the changes or events that occurred during the year. This portion of the report is actually drafted by Margaret. All we do is make sure there are no discrepancies in the report in regards to the numbers that contradict what we have in our audited financial statements. And I'm not going to spend any time looking at that. When you have a chance, you can read through it. And again, that is the management's discussion of the changes that occurred during the year and the major events, as well as anticipated events that are coming up in this current fiscal year. If you turn to page 10, that is your statement of net position. That shows all the assets and the liabilities of the town. Everything except infrastructure, which is not included, roads, bridges, that sort of thing. But anything else is going to be brought and disclosed here. It kind of puts the town on a for-profit basis so that you can see at the bottom line what the net worth of the town is, the net position. Again, these are not liquid assets, so you really can't do anything with a lot of these. But it does show you the net worth, I guess you could say, of the town at a cost basis. And again, governmental activities, 1.3 million. Your business activities, which is water primary, 1.7 million. And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time looking at that because those are not numbers that you have an opportunity to have budgetary control over or even be able to spend by and large. So it's really not a lot of point taking out of time.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
This is a yearly audit, right?
Right.
Okay,
Well,
gotcha. Okay, thank you.
it's October 1 of 19 through 9/30.
Okay.
On page 11 is the statement of activities. Again, that's all the revenues, all the expenses on the full basis that the town incurred. And you'll see down at the net, third line from the bottom, change in net position. That's what the net worth of the town changed, increased or decreased as a result of operations last year. The net of the two, the business type and your governmental, was $59,298 increase. We're going to spend a lot more time looking at those numbers when we get to the fund level statements, because that's what you really have budgetary control over, and that's really where the significant items that we need to discuss are going to be found. And those begin on page 12. You'll see two funds there, the general fund and the motor fuel tax fund. The motor fuel tax is limited as to their use, can only be used for road repair, primarily on paving, if you should accumulate enough cash to do that. But pretty much patching potholes is pretty much what we're going to be limited to be able to use that money for. The general fund is the area you'll have total discretionary control over. That's where you're going to spend the vast majority of your time and budget, as well as where the vast majority of the operating revenues and expenses of the town, with the exception of the water, is going to show up. End of the year with $70,401 of cash, investments, and receivables. All of that is either cash or can be converted to cash within 60 days. Obviously, the cash is already cash, investments is in the CD, so if you needed to get to that, you could. And receivables are all due within 60 days. This is not the water, this is really government, due to the state of Florida primarily. Very limited liabilities, only owed $4,000, so you had an unassigned net fund balance in general fund of $66,000. One of the calculations I always make, and that was on the one that I cannot seem to locate, is how many days of reserve that represents. GFOA recommends 60 days of reserves in your general fund. I was trying to do the math real quick while I was sitting there, and 60 days of expenditures. But if you take, on page 14, you'll see the expenditures for the general fund. Last year was $354,000. $155,000 of that is capital outlay. So if you take that $354 and back out that $155, that'll leave you about $200,000 of operating expenses. Divide that by 365 and multiply it by 60, and you'll see what the recommended reserve is. Can you do that real quick? Somebody got a calculator on that?
That's
Those are odd numbers, right? I'm trying to do it in my head. I think you're going to come up with about, I think I've got like, well, I could have to compute to somebody else. I wouldn't, so let's go with that. $200,000 divided by 365 times 60. What do you get?
Oh, 32,876.
Yeah. So the recommended fund balance is 4,000. You got 66.
Yeah.
That's the best Wausau has been in a while, I can tell you.
It is?
Oh, yeah.
That's almost 4 months.
Yeah, yeah.
We're recommended 2 months.
Yeah. Basically what it's saying is you could operate for how many days if you got no more revenue? No more revenue came in, how many days could the city continue to operate, given its normal operating expenditures? And again, I've seen Wausau, I don't know, we haven't seen the negative balance in general fund. If it wasn't, it was close. I believe we've seen it when it was negative. So trending in the right direction. Last year, if you go back to page 44, you ended the year with $310. So I mean, it was negative. So it was basically a break-even year. So it's really not any real impact there. Did have a special event there. You'll see $112,500, which was the selling of the lease on the water tower to the telecommunication company. That's a one-time event, but that was offset, I'm sure, by the capital outlay. So $155,000, unless it's a grant activity, you generally don't have that much in capital outlay. But the bottom line is, in terms of where you ended the year last year, from a financial statement standpoint, you were in pretty good shape given where we have been. It's not to say you got a lot of cushion, but as long as you keep your expenditures kind of in line with where they have been, you've got it was about 120 days worth of operating capital available, which is pretty strong for Wausau, no question. Again, on page 14, that's the statement of revenues and expenses. We've got a schedule back here that breaks those down in a little more detail. We can look at those in just a minute. Next report I would point out to is page 18. This is the water department. That's all the assets and liabilities, and that does include all your capital assets and all the debt related to the water system. Very bottom shows you the net position of it, 1.7 million. Net investments in capital assets, 7,674 is restricted for debt service, and the water department is actually running a deficit at this point of 31,129, meaning it had to be subsidized at some point in time over the years to operate. Either that, or we transferred more money out of it over to the general fund than it had accumulated in net income. But that is a historical accumulation of all the operating activities of the water department since inception. So since inception,
You know what caused the deficit?
a lot of it's depreciation.
A lot of depreciation, some of it's,
Depreciation- Well, I'll take that back, because depreciation is gonna hit your net investment capital asset.
Back when Goulding was talking about the water was doing really good several years ago, the general fund was not, we transferred some out of water into general fund, we transferred some out of, general, water into the fire department, to general funds, to the fire, and that's just a transfer.
Yeah, we did do quite a bit of that. I do remember at one point we were sitting up at
Several years.
U2s and receivables and
Yeah.
payables, and it did like there was every intent to
No,
pay
no
that.
intent to
so-
pay them back, so that it's just washed
Yeah, we just,
out.
I thought
They
it
just
probably
took them
had, I thought it probably had to do with transfers, but wouldn't we be pretty well advised not to over-transfer?
well, you gotta manage it, obviously. What you really wanna be cognizant of are our rates where they need to be. That's really what the statement of net position in combination with the statement of activities, which is on the next page 19. That's what you really need to be focused on when it comes to the water system. Are we charging enough to continue to operate it and maintain it without charging so much that we're just accumulating money, just for the sake of accumulating money? If you look at it last year, and last year it was really difficult for me to get my arms around, because it's showing an operating loss of about $128,000. Now, $108,000 of that is depreciation, which means it operated at about $20,000 cash loss last year.
That is going to be that comp fund, which we've collected now. It's like $17,000 that Waste Management did.
I got you.
Tom Thumb
Yeah.
was a corporate account, and then they took it away from us, but then they switched it back to us and didn't notify us, so they didn't get billed for like a year, they just paid all that back. Tom Thumb has, for garbage service.
Well, that look good.
Yeah, that'll look good next year.
Yeah.
Our rates are high enough to run the water department without the transfers. I think I heard you
No,
say.
you took a $10,000.
Yeah, we had to do a
transfer.
$10,000 transfer, which was some of what, Tom Thumb was creating a loss in the water system.
Is that where the $10,000 come in?
It went from general funds to water, yes.
And you probably need 2 years head side by side, so you know where you do it, because some of this has been made up this year. It's not like, my concern was, and you may address it in here, if you recommend later on that we raise rates, if we need to raise rates to operate the system, we need to do what we need to do, but we're raising
Well,
rates
yeah.
to generate a place to transfer money from.
Mhm.
I'm not in favor of that.
Yeah,
No.
yeah. No, we actually transferred money, and there has been over the years a lot of transferring back and forth between the general fund and the water, whichever
Always,
one
yeah.
happened to have some resources at that point in time. But when you do the quick math, and I apologize, because I had all this laid out in my notes, but the water department itself essentially broke even last year with what Margaret's saying. Now, without what Margaret's saying, we had to subsidize it by $10,000. Had that $17,000 come into last year, we wouldn't have had to make the
We
transfer.
wouldn't have to make a transfer now.
And we would have had a small profit instead of having had. The loss of $128,000 is somewhat misleading because $109,000 of that is depreciation, which is a non-cash expenditure. We don't have to spend money to incur that expense. So you really need to look at this in terms of the cash flow. And are we generating enough cash flow to maintain the system? And just looking at it without hearing what Margaret just said, you're walking a fine line. You're still walking a fine line, but a $7,000-8,000 profit versus a $17,000, $27,000 loss
Right.
is a pretty big deal.
Right.
Or $10,000 loss, whatever, yeah.
And Hilton had some concerns about our salary, there's a big difference in salaries, this year. And the contract labor, Mr. Register went up quite a bit, And then we updated to $15 an hour, But he was contract for part of the year. But that was some of the questions he had asked me.
Yeah, I do attach a schedule, Roger, that does a comparative. I have my other
Yeah,
report.
I think you answered my immediate question. When you get to that, we'll get you.
Well, I don't see it, I can't look to it. It's got the 20 expenses compared to 19 expenses,
Page 52.
52. There we go. Yeah, there's the comparative that we were looking at. The you were referring to, the $7,800 reduction in revenue is obviously impacted by the Tom Thumb account. Had we gotten that, we would have actually had an increase in revenue this year. The big expenditure change, if you notice, contract labor went down $9,000, but salaries were up $19,000. So that's what I was having a conversation with Margaret about, what triggered that.
David went from contract to, in that fiscal year, he went from contract labor to employee. We had him on contract while we were going through the lawsuit.
Mm-hmm.
And if you'll notice, last year, we were talking about transfers. Last year, the water transferred out $7,300 over to the general fund. This year, went the other way around. The general fund subsidized water by $10,000. So again, I mean, we're not just floating in operating income and in cash over on the water. But you're kind of, as I look at it, you're kind of at a break-even point. I mean, I don't think you certainly can't justify any less revenue, whether or not you want a rate increase as a city council, and whether or not y'all think you need it in order to continue to operate, and start generating more reserves. If the council went that way.
Oversimplify, if I'm looking at the total operating expenses, 18,177 increase, but we're saying that of that 18, it is going to be washed out or accounted for in the contract labor plus
Yeah, you had you had the landfill was up 6,000, I think they increased the rates, is that right?
You know, and, landfill, yeah, they increased.
You had a $19,000 increase in salaries, and your contract labor went down 9,200. Also, last year y'all paid 4,000 of professional fees out of the water. This year you didn't pay any, you paid it all out of the general fund.
So the uncollected Tom Thumb plus the difference between contract labor and salary would account for most of that.
Oh, yeah.
And neither one of those should be over our head now.
No, they're not, exactly.
Again, when I look at it, it's kind of like you're treading water. You know, you're breaking even, basically. If not, have you had to subsidize it at all this year?
No.
At this point?
No.
If you're starting to run low on cash, or the cash flow is not adequate to pay the expenses, you're gonna be subsidizing from the general fund.
Yeah.
And that's a trigger. That's when you know, well, we got issues either way. If we have to move money out of water over to general fund, you need to know why, and vice versa.
Yeah, and you mentioned it a while ago, and I think this is concern to me that I mentioned to Margaret over and over, and probably at the table, I've mentioned it a few times, is this lease that we sold. That was unanticipated revenue back and it does not need to be put into a budget to be used anywhere. It needs to be out there when something blows up or tears up. That 120 days is not enough. We need something out there. But if we start transferring out.
Yeah.
It's like I put some money in savings and I put some in the checkbook. If I'm not able to live in the checkbook, I need to do something about my personal expenditures and things like that. So if we ain't able to live on budgeted revenue without reaching over here and getting investment revenues and things like that, we need to take a look at our budget, our expenditures. So
We'll have a lot of grant activity this year. I don't know, it's probably, typically it's dollar for dollar. You don't make money on any grant.
No.
Do y'all have any matching requirements?
We have matching on one of 25,000, and that's gonna be some in there, you know, we haven't paid all that yet.
we probably lose money on grants.
We probably should.
Yeah, most people do, but I mean, you can't walk away from it.
And we've got several thousand that we've got to, you know, that we've obligated to pay out that was above the,
Yeah. Is there gonna be additional state appropriation maybe to help with the matching
no,
requirement, or?
no.
That's gonna tap into that special
Reserve, yeah, some, yeah,
120,000
some.
we're talking about.
How much of that money we got?
Oh, Lord. Well, I can't tell you that, we get all this fire department stuff here.
So I guess.
Now, I know
I
last
guess
year we budgeted
agreed
some
as-
of it, yeah.
We agreed as a council, we wouldn't spend that.
Yeah.
So we've come back and spent because we got.
We pulled out one thing or another, yeah.
I got concerned, are we gonna have enough money in place to get it back in there?
Yes, sir.
That amount of money we got to agree would not be spent, needs to not be spent, because this council wishes to spend it.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. I'm not speaking for each of you. I'm thinking if we agreed not to spend it, then we ought not to spend it until we've agreed to spend it.
If you flip back over to page 10, some of that has been spent because.
Yeah, it's went into some of the fire department expenditures and
Okay,
stuff
the
like
cash
that.
balance at the end of the year was 48,000.
Yeah.
At some point, that 122 got,
It's in there somewhere, it'll be back out.
so, don't want to confuse the issue.
Yeah.
So some of it has already been.
But while we've been, how we there, how did we get that spent? Did we agree to do that? I don't think I missed any meetings.
No, but last year in the budget, when the state cut our budget funds, if you'll go back to the meetings with the budget, there was a certain amount of those tower funds, there's a line item on that budget, and we went back and took some back out of it. But to balance the budget last year because of the COVID. Now we're getting the affordable care monies, those could be put back into where we had to spend our investment monies to supplement our budget. That's what they're telling me.
And I don't know what you just told me, but I voted on the budget. I voted to adopt the budget, but I'm not sure that I understood that was what was
It was
in
the
there.
detail, when I gave you the detail, I'll look it up and find it.
Okay, I don't need it right away, but in a few days, if you do that for me, and
I will.
just refresh my memory,
I will.
so that I'm not confused.
Speaking of, if you turn to page 16, I think I'll give you a little bit of background. Y'all budgeted a deficit of $18,750. And then explain the full delta between the 56,000 that you have in cash investments and the 122,000 that the town was generated, but for 112,000. But you did, to Margaret's point, did budget a deficit last year. So we anticipated having to subsidize the general fund with available resources.
Okay, and which line is that now?
On page 16, you'll see about 5, 6 lines up, excess deficiency of revenues over expenditures,
Yes, sir.
18,750. That was the budgeted deficit. Now, you didn't incur that, because you see our beginning fund balance was 66,506, and we ended up at 66,196. So, you overcame that $18,000 deficit that you had budgeted. But the cash that was generated by the tower sale, some of that has been utilized.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I was on page 19. That's the operating revenues, expenses for the water. That's what y'all have to really keep your finger on the pulse of, determine whether or not your rates are adequate to maintain the system. Ideally, you do want it to be generating some income, because the system's gonna break down anytime a pumping station goes out. I mean, you're not talking about $500, you're talking about some real money. So the water really needs to be able to operate at somewhat of a profit. Last year may have been an anomaly due to the things we've already talked about, and the fact that the Tom Thumb didn't kick in. So if Margaret gave y'all accounting through June 30, that'd be 9 months. That may be a little better indicator of where you really are right now versus this particular year, because it does look like there were some unusual events that occurred occurred last year that impacted the operation. But again, we go back to 54, page 54, you'll have a 2-year comparison. 54, page 52. The revenues were down 7,800, which we've accounted for that. Expenses were up 18,000. So last year, where we had you would have had a operating, when you take depreciation out, something weird in there last year. It's 150, 100, almost broke even last year. Had a little bit of a profit last year, got a little bit of a loss this year. When you make those tweaking adjustments. What I always like to do, and I did do, and I apologize, I've lost that before somehow where I had done it, but I always take the net income, add back depreciation, and subtract out the principal on your debt service, because that gives you a basic picture of the cash. You know, where are we in terms of cash? And if we're break even, then you're saying, well, we charged exactly what it took to maintain that system. Nobody paid 1 cent more than it took to maintain it, and we didn't collect 1 cent less than it took to maintain it. And that's what you kind of want to focus on, determining whether or not it's time for a rate adjustment, or keep your rates where they are, or
We go up every year on
And
the rate.
zero balances just ain't the real world.
No, you're gonna have anomalies, you're gonna have years more, and the anomalies are gonna be unanticipated expenses. They're not typically gonna be unanticipated revenues.
And looking at the top of page 52 that he's reading from now, just to remind us, when he says last year, we was plus or minus, and this year we're plus or minus, he's meaning 19 is last year, and 20 is this year, not the year that we're in now,
Correct.
2021. So that's compared, the older one's a year behind.
Yeah. And like I said, Margaret can give you a 9-month accounting.
They get it every month.
Yeah. But the tail is, the absolute tail is, are we having to transfer money out of general fund over to water and subsidize it? If you are, then you know that you're operating, you've got a deficit going on there, because you have to subsidize it.
With our last water budget, our last ordinance, Well, for an annual,
We annually increase whatever the, public service commission.
that's probably the reason we stayed this close to balances we are, because we are tied to CPI or something.
Yeah, it's 1.7 for this coming year, so we may.
Which I really like that concept.
Yeah.
We raise every year in November.
And it's so much easier on citizens, because most of them just 30 cent or 50 cent or a dollar.
Yeah.
And
Rather than waiting 10
if
years.
you hold it here and vote on raising rates,
Yeah.
that holds lots of attention.
Y'all do that, Chipley does that, I really think that is prudent management. I really do, because I've seen towns that would sit on, sewer's one that really kills towns, because they'll get a grant or get loans from Farmers Home with no expectation in my mind of being able to service that debt. And then they find themselves in a black hole they can never dig out of. And if they wait years upon years to increase rates until they've depleted all their cash, then they try and have 25%, 30% rate increases. And, you know, everybody's screaming.
We had to do 100% one year.
Yeah, you just can't sit here and not make adjustments on a systematic basis. That's essentially the numbers that reflect the results of operations and the financial position of the town. The next section is the notes. About all I ever point out there, at least from Wausau, would be page 35 and then page 36. And page 35 and 36. You'll see your investment in capital assets. Last year, the town reinvested $265,000 into buildings primarily. Also had some machinery and equipment, but the total that y'all invested in the town last year, not just an expense that's going to be reoccurring, was $265,000. That's extremely strong. Obviously, for Wausau, a lot of that was grant money, as we know. Because if you turn over on page 36, down about 3 or 4 lines up from the bottom, you'll see the total debt at the beginning of the year was $321,847 on the water. At the end of the year, it was $322,000. So the water was basically flat. And then the general fund, the note payable the general fund had, went down $18,000. So we retired some debt last year, didn't incur any new debt, not in excess of what got retired. There was a $17,000 loan. What was that for on the water?
Lawnmowers.
Do I?
Lawnmowers.
Okay, lawnmower. But basically, the town didn't incur any additional debt. It's actually better off in terms of the operations last year from the debt standpoint. Plus, you invested $265,000 in capital assets that are going to benefit the town for the next 20, 40 years probably. The next item I would point out would be the retirement system, how much we are obligated to for the retirement system. That's on page 42. It takes a lot of pages to get there, and this information is scattered all through it. But if you'll just turn to page 42, that's probably the most concise point you can see it. At the end of the year, we owe retirement to the state. Now, y'all on a pay-as-you-go basis, so y'all don't pay this till the bill comes due. But if the town stopped operating today, it would have a $122,848 obligation to its current and former, well, I don't guess anybody who's retired is already drawn, but that's what the obligation to the state retirement system is at this point. The health subsidies portion of that is on page 45. It's $24,629. That's in addition to the 122. So if we close the doors tomorrow, we'd owe the state retirement system $150,000 for retirement for our employees. And again, that's on a pay-as-you-go basis, but I do like to point that out.
Has that been in there every year?
Yes, sir.
I don't remember us ever addressing retirement.
Well, you've only been in the Florida retirement system how long?
15.
18.
That been that long? Okay.
You addressed
We've been
it.
having fun. We didn't have to disclose this, plus the accounting principles didn't require to be disclosed for probably 2012, 13. I mean, but it's been in here for the last.
When you done that gas fee, whatever that was.
Yeah. But those were being ignored by state and local governments. So the Government County Standard Board said, you can no longer ignore these because it's huge. I mean, nationwide, some of these states, I mean, you hear about Detroit being bankrupt, that's why they're bankrupt. And this information was never disclosed up until that accounting standard came out and said, you can't ignore that. Those are obligations you incur to your
We're not
employees.
understanding how it is that we will owe after, if we were close home, we still owe. We're not paying this stuff every month.
Yeah, you're on a pay-as-you-go basis. You pay when they send you a bill for it.
Uh-huh.
But if Margaret retired tomorrow, Margaret would draw retirement for the next 20 years, 30 years. Well, there's a cost to that. And this projects what that cost would be and assigns a present value to it. If you had 24 plus 120, if you had $150,000-$60,000 cash, you could send that on to the retirement system, and then you wouldn't owe anything. You know, that should subsidize her
I understand
retirement.
that.
in the future.
Maybe I'm not understanding her terms. Once she retires, she begins to draw, she retires what we've already put over there. You're saying money's gonna follow she or one of us if we retire? We're still owe for them?
Yeah, yeah. The only way that wouldn't happen, if interest rates, you know, this is projected on a 6.8% yield on the monies the capital they have for investment. They're assuming and projecting if we get a 6.8% return on the money that we've collected from you, Wausau, then in addition to that, we're gonna have $122,000 to pay over whatever period of time you have somebody drawing retirement. They're speculating and projecting all this. If they got a 7.8% return on the money, you'd only owe $61,000. That's based on a 20-year analysis. They go back 20 years to see what their return on investments has been for the past 20 years. They blend it, and that's how they come up with the 6.8. They say, we anticipate earning 6.8 over the next 20 years, because that's what we did for the last 20 years. But in that case, you're still gonna have to pay them another $122,000. Now, that $122,000 will get paid over the next 20 years, 25 years.
That's the reason big companies try to get out the retirement
That's
system.
exactly why they got out of it. You're gonna
Yeah.
find defined benefit. This is a defined benefit plan, meaning you're breathing, you get the money.
Yeah.
You mean the county's still paying on me?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Unless they're paying on it. I guarantee you. The only people I've ever seen who did what I just said was a judicial system in Louisiana. They do weird stuff in Louisiana. We do a lot of work over there. But these judges had unbelievable amount of cash set aside. So they said, we're going to fund our retirement. So no matter who replaces us, no matter what the legislature does, we know our retirement's taken care of. So they had the money to do it. They sent the money on the retirement system. And, you know, they don't know any of it.
And when I worked and did budgets, you were not our auditor, so this is not to throw stones at anybody, but certainly to make sure everybody, but in all the budgets I ever made, and all the audits we ever went through, I would tell you that was never explained.
But, yeah.
I would tell you, well, I don't want to speak for them.
Well, what you budgeted for was what the anticipated cost in the next fiscal year is going to be.
That's what we budget for.
Yeah, and same here also, y'all budget for what you anticipate that next year's cost to be. This is projecting out over 20 years, because if we stopped operating tomorrow as a city, we still have an obligation to our retirees. Or are you the only ones participating in the retirement system?
Everybody but Judy opted out.
Okay.
It would be the best thing for a small town, though, if they would let them opt out of part of retirement, would be the best thing that ever happened. You know, probably, you know, not for not for us that want to retire, but, but, for the budget to,
You can't give us local government or county 101 at the time we got limited here tonight. But when we pay the retirement system, whatever percent we ought to on her check or my check or something like that, it's up to the retirement system to take care of them.
Yeah, but they're gonna send you a bill if they don't have the money sitting there to do it.
so this is, and
She gets you go on the Florida retirement system, look at the unfunded pension obligation. That's the amount that they are obligated for, that they don't have the cash for today to pay out. It's like of a bank. if every depositor showed up at a bank tomorrow to draw their money out, they'd be in trouble.
They don't set aside that money, you know, they're supposed to set aside that money, and they don't do it, I mean. Some
Well,
retirement systems go broke,
Yeah, you've heard of retirement systems going.
Yeah.
Detroit's going, I mean, there's tons of them, there's gonna be a bunch more, when all these baby boomers
Yeah.
start walking out the back door.
Yeah.
So it's a huge concern, that's why you see this information being presented now, you didn't just a decade ago.
Yeah, and even though the drop was the most employee-friendly thing that ever come along, perhaps, it was also a big, what you're talking about now is
Yeah.
the other shoe falling.
Right, yeah. But, and I don't have it in front of me, or they go to board retirement.
If we got business, they come here to convert, they gonna be surprised.
It was huge, I mean, in 08 and 09, when the market collapsed.
Yeah.
I mean, these
Private
retirement
retirement
systems were jumping off the cliff, because they knew if the thing didn't turn around, because a lot of them were invested in the market. I mean, they depend on those equities going up. They were in trouble, they were in serious trouble.
So that you can move along, I just say it don't sound right that we paid one time, and then they don't invest it or don't take care of it, and they come back and ask us to make it up on the back end. There's something wrong with that picture.
Yeah, there's all kind of arguments.
That's too much politics. Go ahead.
Maybe about mine and your pay grade.
Yeah,
how
yeah,
that works.
go ahead.
The number that the Florida retirement system is unfunded is a huge number. I don't, this is your proportionate share, and I get it. I mean, I get it out of the Florida retirement. I mean, I don't make these numbers up. They come off of their report. I just don't remember what the totals were that were trickling down to y'all. But that's why I bring that up. I think every small town, local government needs to be aware of the fact they've got obligation to future retirees. And though that number, they may not be aware of that number, or thinking about that number, it's a real number. And if we discontinued operations, somebody would be on the hook to pay it, or the retirees wouldn't get their retirement. And what everybody is hoping is everything continues to operate. We'll be able to come up with resources that the retirement benefits are being paid out. The next section of the report is our report on internal control and compliance with laws, rules, and regulations. That begins on page 53. Again, we only had one finding. We didn't have any finding of non-compliance, meaning that there was no instance of a non-compliance with the law, rule, and regulation. The one finding we had is 2010-01, and I'm flipping through here. That's noted at the top of page 54. Then on page 55 is a report on whether or not you comply with the investment policies in the state of Florida. Again, you did. But the one finding we did have is on page 57. This is a pretty standard finding for
Every year.
small municipalities. It's definitely going to be one for Wausau, because you only have one person in charge of your financial and clerical responsibilities. So she has the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. She receives cash, she pays the bills, she collects. She just basically has control of everything. And when you do that, you obviously can't have adequate separation of duties. In other words, if somebody has access to the billing system, they should never have access to the cash. If they pay the bills, they shouldn't have access to the bank account. With a town the size of Wausau, it has only one clergy. It's just a necessary evil. Keep her bonded. Trust that she's got some principles, integrity about her, and then just do a monthly overview.
They get the whole bank
And give her a
statement.
100% raise.
He was talking about his own strength, yeah. I even opted out of senior retirement, the senior management,
Yeah.
because it was costing them so much money.
You're a good servant.
It's going to be this year.
But there's really nothing y'all can do that other than monitor it. Do the best you can to monitor it. Watch your bank account. I mean, I have seen it. Y'all started reading the newspapers as much as I do, and it wasn't that far away where one town about the size of Wausau basically got bankrupt in 2 months. It doesn't take long, somebody decided I'm gonna take the treasury, and they've got the authority to write checks.
They
They can do it.
is that Esco?
Do what?
Was that Esco? I know
Karen.
it's Karen. I know, yeah, Karen.
Karen.
Yes, she was awful.
Yeah.
Esco had a little problem too.
Not gonna gossip.
Nah, I know.
It happens. But I've never, I've been doing it, I've worked a long time. Well, we did have one problem one time. Y'all was experienced.
I was here.
Yeah, y'all lived it, so you know what I'm talking about. It can happen. But you just gotta watch that bank account for lack of any better monitor for you guys. It's just watch the bank account from month to month. It's going down for any reason. You should know it's gonna go down or why it's going down. And hope if it's going up, you know why it's going up as well. But, cash is the best indicator of whether or not that there's a problem on the front, in front of it. And of course, the vendors are calling them saying our bills aren't getting paid. That's an indication that problems too. But those calls will come pretty quick. Other than that, that's pretty much an overview of the report. There was some spoilage, which you'll see on page 58 of the water well is monitor that. It's really, the more aged a system gets, the higher that number becomes.
On what page was that?
This is on page 58. That's a high number. But y'all built the fire station, I can't explain that. I just point it out. Because again, that's water that's coming out of the ground that's not being billed for.
Now, I got a report for water management, which I do every year now. And it didn't show this much loss when we did, but we account for all. I don't know if y'all count that we meter every town meter, we meter our splash pad, we meter everything.
But you don't bill for that.
We don't bill, that's just unbilled, yeah.
Yeah.
We're not
This
wasting.
is what came out of the ground versus what got billed.
Oh, well,
And as long as you can explain it, that's fine. But I pointed this out to one city council one time, and said, well, that's just not right, that's not it's your numbers, I'm just showing you. So they did a search and found out a couple of farmers on the edge of town tapped into their system and irrigating their crops. I don't know whether or not they were city council members, but I do know that they found that. And you also run into that when you get an aging system, that ages, it gets to be leaks in it and that sort of thing. There's a lot of things that can trigger, but we do always disclose that if it's above 20%. Anything below 20, the best I've ever seen is like 8 or 9 on a brand new system.
Our splash pad, because we don't recirculate it, we just,
Yeah.
but it been from May to October, that time, that was in order.
We're probably gonna push that tank to be draining.
We got that paid for, we got a maintenance contract on that. So now we need to check into the record.
Anybody have a question from Mr. Galloway? Okay, Chair, would entertain a motion that we accept for.
I do have one thing to make y'all aware of.
Okay.
This coming year, we will have a single audit, and that will be an extra. Hilton's cutting us a great break on it, and what we paid this year was 12.2, there'll be an additional 7,500 for a special audit, but some of these grants will kick in and pay for most of that.
Yeah, if you receive over $750,000 in federal funds, that's what they call, we have to do a single audit, meaning we have to go in and do all these federally guideline compliance requirements. Your report next year will be a lot bigger.
Because we got 985,000 out right now, I think.
Already expended.
I think that's what I calculated about it, somewhere around 900,000.
Now, money's typically set aside in the appropriations for the audit.
Yes, it's supposed to be.
Should have to come in. And your grants coordinators, you don't back into a corner, I'll tell you that too.
I'm gonna go ahead and present the credit card, school paper.
Your opening note says it just really depicts the situation.
Yep.
Okay, looking at the situation in your explanations tonight, are we in good shape, fair shape?
You're
the water-
actually in
the water-
better shape than I have seen you in, but
Yeah.
I mean, you can't take your eyes off the road. You gotta keep monitoring the situation. Really,
The water's your main
The
concern.
water's my main concern. You can always control the other, I mean, you can decide not to do something in terms of the expense, but water, you're gonna provide the water because that's a public service that's gonna be demanded of you. You got to, yeah, that's the, and again, like I said, 19 and 20 both look like anomalies to me. They don't.
19 was Michael.
Yeah, Michael, I mean, there's this, 21 should be a true indicator of where you're really at.
What should we keep the profit at water at? Do you have a 10% or something, a figure?
Well, I mean, that's a management decision y'all got to make. I don't try and necessarily insert myself into that conversation, but the biggest thing becomes, what is the single largest operating expense that you would anticipate coming up? It's unanticipated, but like a pumping station. To me, that's the one that always comes to mind. One of your pumping stations goes out, and y'all are on water, so you don't have sewer, so you don't have the pumping station. So you want to be able to cover whatever that unexpected expenditure might be. Again, the GFOA's recommended is 60 days. I didn't do that on the water and sewer, but if you did the math, you could see whether or not we had 60 days. I know you don't on water and sewer, but we just looked at it, it's got a deficit, so.
Yeah.
You know,
And we had a lot of, after Michael, we had a lot of repairs and maintenance and pipes and everything.
Yeah.
that went on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone have a question for Mr. Galloway? Chair would entertain a motion that we accept the audit for record, and if you already done response, do we have to do this audit? That's what I saw today.
Yeah.
What's the pleasure of the council?
Now, we'll get a letter from the governor,
Yeah.
but like we did last year, we'll make a response.
I'll make a response.
Yeah, he makes it give us another one the last 2 years.
I make a motion, we accept the,
We have a motion to accept the audit, for a second.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? How you vote, Mr. Wolfson?
yes.
Mr. Barr? Yes. Mr. Carter?
Yes.
Ms. West? And Chair votes yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Appreciate it.
You help me out.
Tell Mrs. Hammond I said hello. Is she recovering?
She's doing well.
Well.
She was at that funeral today. She was the oldest one there. She keeps reminding me everywhere we go, I'm the oldest one here. I said, well, you know, yeah. It's nice to have you around, because if you leave, I may be the oldest one.
Who's sorry for her loss, but just tell her we said hello.
I'll do it. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Thank you. Let's take a 5-minute recess.